Hey everyone, and welcome back. This deep dive, we're tackling something pretty different. The LAPD policy document.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I know what you're thinking.
Sounds dry.
Super dry, like maybe even click away from this podcast dry.
Yeah.
But trust me on this, it's not about memorizing every single rule.
Okay.
It's about getting this. The principles and values, how LAPD officers, what shapes how they act on the streets, and we got everything in
I
here.
was gonna say, it's got to be huge, right?
Oh, it's massive. Crime prevention, use of force, media relations, even like drone usage.
So it's like a kind of like a behind the scenes look
Exactly.
at their playbook, how they take the written stuff and turn it into what they do.
Exactly. And to help us break this whole thing down, we've got an expert with us, someone who can connect the dots, the theory, and what happens in real life.
Awesome.
So let's jump right in. The document, it starts by defining some basic terms.
Yeah.
Value, objective, principle.
Mm.
Seems pretty simple, but why? Why start with that?
Well, I think it's actually clever. Okay.
These terms, they all work together.
Okay.
So think about it. If your value is like health and your objective, your goal is to run a marathon.
Okay.
The principle is that thing that guides you, right?
Mhm.
Consistent training or eating the right foods. LAPD document, it's the same idea. Values drive the goals, objectives, and the principles are like the roadmap to get there.
So it's not just following orders, right? You've got to have this framework to make judgments, especially when things get messy.
Yeah, for sure. And the document, it actually says this. Officers face, quote, an infinite variety of situations.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's exactly why good policy is so important. Not just a rule book,
Yeah.
a guide for making good ethical decisions when things are always changing.
Okay, well, speaking of ethics, let's get into the core values, right? The document, it lists some big ones. Leadership, integrity, respecting people, reverence for the law. That's a lot to live up to. Yeah, ambitious for sure. But they actually impact how the LAPD works. For example, commitment to community relations. That's reflecting the value of leadership, right? Being partners with the community, not just enforcers.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when those values clash? Like respecting individual rights while also enforcing the law? Seems like a tough balance.
It is, and the document actually talks about that. The real measure of police effectiveness isn't just about how many arrests they make. It's about the absence of crime.
Interesting, right? That is. And it leads perfectly to our next point. The document, it put crime prevention as the top goal, even above catching criminals, which, that challenges how we usually think about police. Like they're just crime fighters.
It does, and it's shaped a lot of their programs, like the Community Safety Partnership. It's all about building trust in high-crime areas, getting to the root of the problem.
So it's not just like putting a Band-Aid on the problem. They're trying to prevent it from even happening.
Exactly, that proactive approach. You see it in how they handle specific challenges, too. You were interested in their policies on domestic violence, language barriers, and mental health.
Yeah, those stood out to me. Like, for example, the domestic violence policy. It's super clear. It's not a private matter. It's criminal, period.
Yeah, makes a big difference. Means every call is treated seriously, no matter who's involved.
Right, exactly. And then you've got the language policy. It's amazing, considering how diverse LA is. Recognizing they need to communicate with everyone, even those who don't speak English.
Imagine, you're a resident, you only speak Spanish, and you need to report a crime. Having an officer who understands you, who can get you a translator, it's huge.
Yeah, it's about making sure everyone feels safe and heard. And then there's the whole mental health piece. It's a big issue everywhere, but especially in LA.
Right. The policy, it focuses on humane, compassionate responses, recognizing that these situations, it's not always about making an arrest. They've got officers trained to assess people in crisis and connect them with the right resources.
So in a way, they're acting like social workers, which again kind of goes against that traditional view of law enforcement.
It does. But it shows how the LAPD is adapting, trying to meet the needs of the community. Not just enforcing the law, but solving problems, getting at those root issues that cause crime and disorder. Now, shifting gears a bit, the policy also really gets into internal accountability.
Right. Those sections on employee conduct were pretty eye-opening, I gotta say. It goes beyond just like not doing anything illegal. There's stuff on financial responsibility, avoiding conflicts of interest, even saying officers can't endorse products or services.
Yeah, it's all about public trust, right?
Right.
Making sure the officers are acting with integrity, on duty, off duty. It's crucial.
So it's not just about avoiding scandals. It's about building a culture of accountability within the department.
Exactly. They've got clear procedures for reporting and investigating violations, whether it's taking a bribe or discriminating against someone. It's about holding officers to a high standard.
Okay, speaking of accountability, let's talk about their relationship with the public and the media. Those sections, particularly the one on media relations, they were really interesting. How they try to be transparent, but also protect ongoing investigations.
Right. They've got this critical incident video release policy, sometimes called the 45-day rule, requires them to release footage of things like officer-involved shootings within 45 days.
Okay, so about increasing transparency. But there are situations where they can delay releasing the footage, right?
Yeah, to make sure they don't mess up an investigation or put someone's safety at risk. But even then, the decision to delay, it has to be unanimous. The chief of police and the police commission, they all have to agree.
Hmm. It definitely makes you think about where's the line? The public's right to know versus doing a fair investigation.
Right, it's a balance.
Now, one thing I'm sure will get people's attention is the LAPD's policy on using drones.
Oh, for sure.
Drones, or SUS, it's a big topic these days. And the LAPD's approach, it's pretty interesting. So how are they allowed to use these things? Is it just Big Brother watching everything we do?
Not at all. They mainly use them in high-risk situations where they need a view from above,
Okay.
like barricaded suspects, hostage situations, search and rescue.
Okay, that makes sense. But there have to be limits, right?
Oh, yeah.
What about people's privacy?
The policy is super specific about what drones can't be used for. Routine patrol, putting weapons on them, facial recognition, all of that is a big no-no. Every time they use a drone, it has to be approved.
Okay.
There are rules about protecting data, and it's all overseen by the police commission and the inspector general.
So it's not about just watching everyone all the time.
Nope.
It's about using tech in a targeted way in specific situations.
Exactly. It's a great example of how policy shapes how they use new tech, making sure it helps the community and respects people's rights.
This is really just the beginning, though. There's so much more in this document. Personnel management, budgeting, training, specialized units.
Yeah, it really shows you how complicated policing is these days. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about all these challenges: legal, social, technological.
So we've barely scratched the surface.
Barely.
Ready to go even deeper into this LAPD world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's so much more to uncover. You know, it's important to remember the LAPD, they're not working alone.
Right.
They're part of this big system. Other law enforcement agencies, the courts, the community, all of it.
It's like this huge puzzle. And they're just one piece, right?
Yeah.
The document, it actually talks about collaboration being really important, inside the department and outside.
Yeah, exactly. There are whole sections on working with other agencies, sharing information, even like joining those task forces.
And it's not even just crime fighting.
Right.
Public service, helping people, responding to emergencies, gives you this bigger picture of their role in the community.
It does, but it's interesting. They draw a line when it comes to civil matters.
Yeah.
They won't get involved unless it could turn into something criminal.
I get that. Their main job is safety and upholding the law, not like settling arguments between neighbors.
Right, exactly. They emphasize staying neutral in those cases, encouraging people to, go through the legal system. They even avoid criticizing other parts of the system, like the courts or prosecutors.
Yeah, makes sense. It's not about silencing anyone. It's about being professional with the other people in the justice system.
Yeah.
But one section, it really got me curious. The one on consular and diplomatic relations. Not really something you think about with everyday policing.
No, it's pretty interesting. It gives you a look at the challenges they face dealing with people who have diplomatic immunity.
Okay, so tell me more about that. What are the key things in that section?
Well, first, it's all about respecting diplomatic immunity. Diplomats, their families, staff, they're protected from being arrested or detained, even for, traffic stuff.
Seriously, so not even parking ticket.
Nope. They can't even tow their car. It's all about this international agreements. Gotta respect the protocol.
Wow. Okay, but what if a diplomat is driving recklessly, like really dangerously? They can't just get away with that, can they?
Well, in those rare cases, a supervisor, they gotta be called in. They might give a ticket, but even then, gotta be super respectful. It's a delicate situation.
Wow, that's a lot of deference.
Yeah.
What about consular officers? They get the same level of
Not exactly. Career consular officers, they have something called functional immunity, which is more limited. So they can be arrested for serious crimes with a warrant or if they're a clear danger. But for smaller offenses, they're usually okay.
So diplomatic immunity, that's like total protection. And consular immunity is tied to their job.
Exactly. And the policy, it emphasizes treating all these folks with respect, even if they do have to take some kind of action.
So it reminds you, policing isn't just local. It crosses over into international relations.
It does.
And it really shows you how important training is, making sure officers know all these little details so they don't mess things up.
Speaking of training, it's got to be key when it comes to use of force, right? That's always a sensitive topic.
It is. And the policy goes into a lot of detail, laying out the rules for LAPD officers using force.
So what's the main philosophy? What are their, guiding principles?
The document, it says it very clearly. It all starts with reverence for human life.
Okay, that sounds good, but what does that actually look like on the streets?
Well, first off, officers, they're supposed to try and de-escalate the situation whenever possible. They're trained to use, time, distance, talking to people, all those tools to try and resolve things peacefully.
So it's not about going in with guns blazing. It's about assessing the situation, calming things down.
Right, exactly. And even when force is necessary, it has to be proportional. They can only use the level of force that matches the threat they're facing.
Makes sense. You wouldn't use the same force to arrest someone who's not resisting as someone who's attacking you with a weapon. Exactly. And the policy is really clear that you can't discriminate. No using force based on someone's race, religion, any of that.
That's good to hear. Force should only be used when you absolutely have to, and never because of bias. What about those extreme cases? When deadly force is involved, what does the policy say about that?
It's very specific. Deadly force is only okay if the officer honestly believes it's necessary to protect themselves or someone else from serious harm, like an immediate threat.
So it's about protecting life,
Yeah.
not punishing someone or getting revenge.
Right. And the policy also says officers need to think about their surroundings, the risk to bystanders before firing their weapon. They got to minimize harm to innocent people.
That's a lot of responsibility. What about warning shots? Are those allowed?
The policy, it doesn't really like those. It says they should only be used in really specific situations if it might actually prevent them from having to use deadly force.
So not common. Are there things officers are specifically not allowed to do?
Yeah, for sure. Like shooting at moving vehicles or from a moving vehicle, unless there's a threat from someone other than the driver. They've really thought about all these scenarios trying to keep things safe.
So it's not just making a quick decision in the heat of the moment. There's a whole review process after any use of force.
Right. It's not just about how the officer felt. It's about if their actions were reasonable based on everything that was happening. And that review, it's pretty thorough.
A system of checks and balances, huh? Making sure everyone's accountable.
Exactly. And, this policy, like all policies, it's always changing. It's got to reflect what's going on, what people expect.
Right. It's not set in stone. It's a living document.
Yeah.
Now, all this talk about best practices and standards, it all comes back to training. What's the LAPD's approach to that?
They emphasize training a lot throughout an officer's whole career. Starts with the academy, then goes to specialized courses, programs.
So it's not learn the basics and you're done, huh?
Nope. Always learning. They have programs for everything. Firearms, defensive tactics, de-escalation, crisis intervention. They even encourage officers to get more education.
It's amazing how much a modern police officer needs to know. It's not just enforcing laws, it's problem solving, communication, even social work sometimes.
It is. The policy reflects that. It's not just formal training either, right? There's on-the-job training, mentorship.
Oh, right, like learning from the more experienced officers.
Exactly. It's about creating this culture of continuous learning. And it shows you the importance of leadership. Supervisors, commanders, they're not just bosses. They're involved in training their teams.
So training isn't a chore. It's investing in the future, making sure officers are ready for whatever comes next.
Exactly. And just like the world's changing, so is technology.
Right.
The LAPD has really embraced it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And the policy talks about how they use that technology both for operations and accountability. One thing that stood out to me was how tech-driven their record keeping is. Like we all see it on those cop shows, right? Pulling up files on a suspect. But this seems way more intense.
Oh, for sure. They have systems to track everything. Crime stats, arrests, personnel files, use of force, tons of data.
So what do they do with all that?
Well, one thing is crime analysis. They've got software that can pinpoint crime hotspots, track patterns, even try to predict where crimes might happen.
That sounds kind of like Minority Report to me, but I guess if you can see those trends, you can deploy resources better and maybe prevent crime.
Exactly. And they use the data to see how well their own strategies are working, right? Tracking things like response times, arrests, all that.
So data-driven policing,
Yeah.
using information to make better decisions.
Right. And technology also plays a huge role in internal accountability. They've got systems for tracking officer conduct, like the Risk Management Information System, or RMIS.
Okay, tell me about that. What kind of stuff does it track?
It pulls data from all over. Arrest reports, tickets, use of force incidents, complaints, commendations, even training records. It's pretty comprehensive.
So let's say an officer is getting a lot of complaints or using force more than others. That would trigger something.
Yeah, it would flag it. The system uses algorithms, and it tells supervisors if an officer's activity looks unusual.
So like an early warning system.
Yeah.
They can step in before a small problem becomes a big one.
Exactly. And it's not just about catching the bad guys. It also highlights officers who are doing really well.
Oh, okay, so recognizing achievements too.
Yeah.
So a tool for accountability and for positive reinforcement.
Right. And it's a great example of how the LAPD is using technology to be better, to build a better relationship with the community.
All this tech talk is fascinating, but let's get back to the humans for a minute.
Uh,
How does the policy address employee conduct?
they've got this really detailed code of conduct covering everything: professionalism, integrity, financial responsibility, avoiding conflicts of interest.
So it's about keeping those ethical standards high, maintaining the department's reputation on the job and off.
Exactly. They're really clear about what they expect.
Give me some examples. What are some absolute no-nos for LAPD officers?
Well, number one, any kind of discrimination or harassment is totally forbidden based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that.
That's just basic decency, right?
It is, but it's important to have it in writing, so there's no confusion. They also have rules against accepting gifts, having side jobs that could be a conflict of interest, using their position to benefit themselves.
It's all about keeping that public trust, making sure people see officers as fair and honest.
Absolutely. There are also policies on things like managing your money well, avoiding debt, and being open about potential conflicts of interest.
It's about personal accountability, too. Making sure your own life is in order, reflecting well in the department.
Exactly. And then there are even specific things like no chewing tobacco on duty or in uniform, and a really detailed policy on smoking.
Those seem kind of small compared to things like excessive force. Why are they even in the policy?
It's about that professional image. Even small things can affect how people see the police. They're trying to set a high standard.
So it's about attention to detail, setting the right tone, professionalism and respect.
Exactly. Showing that the LAPD is accountable to the community, not just in big incidents, but in those everyday things.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's amazing how many policies guide the LAPD.
It is. And it's not just abstract rules. They're there to make sure the LAPD is effective, ethical, and working for the community.
And, it's good to remember, there's still a work in progress. They're always trying to improve.
Absolutely. And we as citizens, we have a part to play in that.
Right.
Staying informed, having these discussions, and speaking up for policies that promote safety and rights.
Exactly. By getting involved, we can help make sure our police departments are serving us the right way. Now, you ready to see how all of this works in those really tense situations? Absolutely. Let's dive into how the LAPD handles things like hostage situations, barricaded suspects, all that. Okay, let's get into those high-pressure situations you mentioned. First up, hostage situations. I imagine the LAPD policy is all about keeping the hostage safe above all else.
Oh, absolutely. Hostage safety is paramount. Their main goal is always a peaceful resolution. Through negotiation, careful tactics, get that hostage out safely, and no one gets hurt.
Man, sounds intense. What are some of the key things that guide their actions in these situations?
Well, containment is huge.
Yeah.
They want to isolate the suspect, keep them from moving the hostage, create this controlled environment. That buys them time,
Okay.
to assess the situation, gather resources, come up with a plan.
So it's about setting up a perimeter, slowing things down.
Exactly. And then communication comes in. They want to talk to the suspect, figure out what's driving them, maybe build a rapport to lead to a peaceful surrender.
All about de-escalation,
Yeah.
right? Trying to calm things down, reduce the chance of violence.
Precisely. And they have these specially trained negotiators, experts in communication, psychology, crisis intervention. They're the ones on the front lines of those conversations.
It really shows you how much goes into modern policing. It's not just chasing bad guys, it's understanding people, managing these really complex situations, and finding those peaceful solutions whenever you can.
It really is. But while the hostage's safety is always number one, the LAPD also knows that sometimes Force is unavoidable.
So in what situations would they actually consider using force during a hostage situation?
The policy says force should only be the last resort when nothing else has worked,
Right.
and there's an immediate threat to the hostage's life or someone else's.
So making those tough calls, weighing the risks, and choosing the option that will most likely save lives.
Exactly. And even then, if they do have to use force, they're supposed to use the minimum amount necessary, just enough to stop the threat and rescue the hostage. It's not about punishment or anything like that. It's about protecting people.
Now, what about barricaded suspects? How does the LAPD approach those?
It's similar to hostages in that, again, the main goal is peaceful resolution. They rely on negotiation, tactics, all that, trying to de-escalate the situation.
So containment, communication, those are key here too.
Absolutely. Isolate the suspect, talk to them, hopefully get them to surrender on their own.
But unlike a hostage situation, there isn't another person whose life is immediately at risk.
That's true, but there's still a danger to the public and to the suspect themselves. They could be armed, maybe mentally unstable, dangerous to anyone who gets close.
So they have a bit more time to work with in these situations.
Yeah.
You can kind of wait it out, see if the suspect calms down.
Exactly. They can use that time to gather information, make a plan, bring in special resources like SWAT teams or negotiators.
But there are also times when they need to act quickly, right? Like if the suspect is shooting or threatening to hurt themselves or others.
Of course, they have protocols for those situations for using force, but again, only as a last resort and always following those principles of being proportional and minimizing harm.
Okay. Let's switch gears a bit. Talk about high-risk prone searches. What exactly does that involve?
So it's used when officers think a suspect might be dangerous, possibly armed.
Okay.
They order the suspect to lie face down, arms and legs spread out. This lets officers approach safely and check for weapons.
Sounds pretty intense. When would they use that kind of technique?
The policy is really clear about this. Only when an officer believes the suspect could seriously hurt themselves, the officer, or someone else.
So not just for any arrest, just when there's a real safety concern.
Right. The officer needs to be able to explain why they think the suspect might be armed and dangerous.
So what kind of things would make them think that?
Well, it could be how the suspect is acting. Are they agitated, making sudden movements, not listening to commands? It could be the situation itself, like, was it a violent crime? Was there a weapon used? Even the location matters. Is it a high-crime area? Are there other potential threats around?
So it's using their training and experience to judge the situation.
Exactly. And even then, the policy emphasizes using the least amount of force needed to control the suspect and do the search safely.
It's a balance, right? Officer safety and the suspect's rights, making sure they're using force appropriately.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember this policy, just like all the use of force policies, it's constantly being reviewed and updated to make sure it aligns with legal standards and what the community expects.
Now let's talk about something that's always controversial: police pursuits. When are LAPD officers allowed to chase a suspect in a car? And what are the rules?
The LAPD pursuit policy, it's very detailed. It's about finding that balance between catching the bad guys and keeping everyone safe.
So it's not just a wild chase every time someone speeds off.
Yeah. No, definitely not. The policy specifically says they can't chase for minor things, like speeding or running a red light.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wouldn't want to risk people's lives over a small traffic violation.
Exactly. Pursuits are only allowed when they think a felony has been committed.
So how serious the crime is, that's a big factor in deciding to chase.
It is, and even then, the officer has to think about a lot of other things before going after someone.
Like what?
Well, how fast is the suspect going? What's the traffic like? What kind of area is it? Residential, busy streets out in the country? And of course, how dangerous could it be for everyone else?
So it's a big decision, not something they take lightly.
Right. They have to think about what could happen if there's a high-speed chase through crowded streets.
Yeah.
The policy also says communication is really important during a pursuit. The officer chasing the suspect has to constantly tell dispatch where they are and what's going on.
So everyone's up to date, and supervisors can stop the chase if it gets too risky.
Exactly. And they have specific rules for how to do the pursuit safely, minimizing the danger to the public.
It's tough, right? Trying to catch criminals, but also keeping innocent people safe.
It is. It shows how complicated police work can be, making those split-second decisions in really intense situations.
This deep dive has been really fascinating. We've covered so much, from the LAPD's core values to these really high-pressure situations they face.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much goes into creating a system for effective and ethical policing. And we can't forget, These policies are always changing, adapting to new laws, community expectations, the way crime is evolving.
Right. It's a good reminder that we as citizens have a say in shaping these policies too. Staying informed, being part of the conversation, advocating for policies that promote both safety and rights, it all matters.
Absolutely. By getting involved, we can help make sure our police departments are doing their jobs the right way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the LAPD policy document. We hope you learned something new, maybe even changed your perspective a bit. Until next time, keep those minds curious.